Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me today is Leslie Bocskor, CEO and Chairman of Indoor Harvest. How you doing today, Leslie?
I'm doing fantastic. It's really great to have a conversation with you.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much for joining us. But before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can email me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Leslie, always want to know that origin story. So for you, what was it that brought you to the cannabis industry?
Okay, so I'm a corporate finance and investment banking executive by trade. I started at Lehman Brothers years ago, went to a couple of small investment banks and focused on the early stage small business access to the capital markets. I just found that I've always been very entrepreneurial, going back to being 13 years old and making sandwiches at home and selling them to my classmates when I was in middle school. And when I was taking a look at a number of different industries as my career grew, I always found that I tend to gravitate towards disruptive new markets that are massive in size. I was one of the first investment bankers to focus on new media and internet companies in the mid to late 90s. I got very fortunate in that one of my best friends was in charge of the entire private wealth management division of Morgan Stanley. And he used to bring me around to numerous Morgan Stanley meetings where I was able to provide value by explaining what I thought was going on with internet new media as the birth of an industry. We saw it go from $500 million in market cap in 1996 to something like 3.2 trillion for the top 280 to 300 publicly traded companies in the year 2000. And after that, I started looking for what are the next big disruptions going to be. And as well as taking on a couple of other roles, I was CEO of a public company. It did very well while I was there. It was really a tremendous experience. I was the CEO of a private company that we sold to Wind River Systems. Also really, terrific experience. And then I was trying to see what's going to be the next big disruption. And I had started to focus on a particular group of industries. I was interested in convergent security, where cyberspace security and biospace security meet, because when you really look at it, crime is one of the biggest industries in the world, and dealing with the issues surrounding crime as it changes and evolves into a digital world that is, a physical and digital world both. I saw that as very interesting. I also was very interested in the monetary systems. I saw beginning in 2004, I started to focus on digital, what that was called digital currency or virtual currency, and trying to understand how the world would evolve as technology changed our global economic systems, our monetary system, and the way we deal with the establishment and transfer of value. I also was interested in the casino industry because I imagined that when the casino industry came online, it would be an absolutely massive shift of creative destruction. And so if you're going to look into the casino industry, where do you go? You go to Vegas. At the time, my wife and I lived in New York City, New York natives, been there since I was born. And we came out to Las Vegas in 2008 and 2009 to do research both on the what I thought was the tip of the spear for online casinos, and that was going to be the online poker industry first. So I came out here during the World Series of Poker to meet with people, meet with stakeholders, meet with operators, etc. And then at that time of year, July, August is also DEF CON, which is the cybersecurity conferences that take place out here, information security. And I attended all of those. And while we were here, my wife and I discovered that warm, dry, and sunny has a very distinct appeal. And the quality of life improvement was interesting. We moved out here, and then that was a significant change for me, in that when I came from the East Coast to the West Coast, I'd been a cannabis enthusiast when I was younger. I smoked the first time when I was 15 years old. I stopped, using it at all when I was working in finance. I was one of those people that didn't drink, didn't smoke didn't do anything. But I'd always known the prohibition was, terrible, the catastrophic policy. One of the worst cases of an extended period of catastrophic policy in the United States. And so when I got out here and I went to visit some friends in the Bay Area for the Singularity Institute for Artificial Intelligence summits, in 2010, after I moved to Vegas, they started going to dispensaries. Now, I came from New York City. People went to buy weed. The dispensary with flour and extracts and all these other things didn't exist. It was a brave new world for me, and I started looking into it. When I came back to Vegas after experiencing that for the first time, I did some research on the size of the black market, and it was over 40 billion a year, according to Rand Corp and the United Nations in 2010. The total value of major league sports, Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA, the NHL in the United States at that time was under 30 billion. Weed was bigger than sports in America. I keep saying it because it's just such an amazing data point. And so I was prepped that when a dear friend who is a master political strategist and operative, Joe Bresney, came to me and said that Washington and Colorado were going to pass legal marijuana, adult use cannabis in 2012 November. I said, Joe, you're just a hopeful stoner. It's never going to happen in our life. And he was right. I was wrong. He predicted it within a point of each Oregon, Washington, and Colorado, the outcome of each ballot initiative. He had right to within 1 point. And so I said, show me how you knew that, why you knew that was going to happen. I took a look at the data, and that was it. I started to unwind every other project I was in and focus on the cannabis and hemp exclusively. And I was just in the right place at the right time with the right message to find myself in great company. I ended up advising presidents and prime ministers, governors, wrote a white paper for the King of Thailand on the CBD market. The governor of Pennsylvania reached out to us literally the day before he was going to sign the Medical Marijuana Act. We advised the government of Costa Rica. We advised stakeholders who were helping to draft policy in Mexico. And I ended up speaking all around the world on the convergence of policy, business issues, and political realities, and how it's critical to have efficient policy from the get-go. And that just was, I was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. And it ended up putting me on a trajectory to take a very deep dive into the changes that the cannabis industry would create in terms of business, as well as the hemp industry, in terms of what it would create in terms of disrupting the paper industry, the textile industry, the plastics industry, potentially construction, and more. And so I started taking a very deep look at all of these things, how cannabis and hemp was going to change the narrative around drug discovery and therapies, how it would affect the nutraceutical industry. And I have just continued to love the work, enjoy the people that I work with, and find opportunities that are likely going to be greater than anything I will ever see again in my lifetime.
When you saw those opportunities, when did you decide to get into the game by starting your own shop?
2013. Okay. So what we saw right away was that we mapped out a path where we saw that for a period of time, licensing was going to be critical. And I ended up becoming the founding chairman of the first ever chapter of the National Cannabis Industry Association, which was the Nevada Cannabis Industry Association. And in that role, I ended up doing a lot of work with the Nevada government, and our team did, not just me, it was Joe Bresney and others. And so that really put me in a place to begin seeing the need to, one, help policymakers, which I did on a pro bono basis, just to be a good corporate citizen. And then for people who wanted to be in the industry, whether they wanted to be operators or deploy capital, I saw a real need to bring the sensibilities of the greater business community and the capital markets that would give us a path to be able to chart in how policy would present opportunities for people to participate in the markets. We then saw a time when the licenses would become less important and brand presence and traditional business strategies would become more important. And so that entire understanding of where the industry was, the industries, and where they would be going really put us in a great position to work with some amazing people. And I consider myself incredibly fortunate to this day to have worked with so many incredible business people, investors, and policymakers.
What was the data you were working with, or your friend was working with, that was able to predict it within a point? And has it held true in predicting other markets to go legal?
Yeah, he's not only is he able to predict them, but he's able to help open them. So his name is Joe Bresney, and he was the former chief of staff to the majority leader of the state Senate in Nevada for over 10 years. As a matter of fact, he was so successful that the then governor was, in gratitude to Joe, declared February 22nd Joe Bresney Day from now to eternity in the state of Nevada. And he at first was the most critical person in getting that, other than the actual elected officials, in my opinion, in getting SB, I think it was SB 374 passed. That was the medical marijuana bill in 2013. And then knowing that he needed immediately to start working on an adult use ballot initiative, which he did start doing again. And without him, we would not have the legal markets here in Nevada. The data he got was based upon his work as a political operative. So he had learned early on in his career in politics and in strategy that every voter, most people think you represent one vote when you go into the voting booth. But in fact, you end up pulling the lever on 40 different issues at times. So you actually represent 40 different votes. And so he had this perspective to understand how to get people, how to increase turnout, bend the turnout curve, and then how to get them to vote on his issues. And and so the data he pulls is polling, both on a local and statewide and then national and international basis. And then he also is able to look at other trends that he sees may have, based upon my understanding, may have some effect on it. And then, just historically, he's had to be able to read those tea leaves in a way to predict what was going on so he could give the best advice to his colleagues as regards getting policy through.
What was it like those early days at the NCIA?
Wow, it's just extraordinary. It was to see the birth of an industry like this in this particular way. So it was different from the birth of the internet and new media, in that was a non-existent industry that sort of came to be because of technological advancements. This was an industry that essentially should have been growing. Over the last 100+ years, we should have had advances in hemp for paper because it's so much more efficient. We should have had everybody's talking about microplastics. How many times are we going to see the word microplastic, the term microplastics today? And that's because of hydrocarbon-based plastics, which would not have been as prominent if the hemp plant had been advancing with technological advances for that last 100 years. And so and then cannabis for wellness, for so many other uses, it had been held back through prohibition for such an extended period of time. And so that shift of something transitioning from a black market to a gray market to a regulated market, and the NCIA being in this extraordinary position to be a national trade association that was working to set up local chapters, the opportunity to not just have a tremendous industry set up, but to start looking at how we might approach things differently than other industries based upon the fact that this is all happening in a very modern context. It really was, I mean, I look back on it today, there was really a tremendous sort of camaraderie. There was a lot of what people call co-opetition. The collaboration amongst people was extraordinary, and seeing how this was all transitioning over time and seeing how there were all these business issues that were so different that affected this. For example, that every state essentially was like a country in setting up a ring fence around it where nobody could do business in the cannabis industry over state lines, not because of the federal government, but because the states stopped it. To look at the issues that came around the lack of access to capital because of the federal policy friction with local state policy, and how that changed access to capital. So there's no mortgage financing, there's no equipment lease financing, it's impossible to get business loans. I mean, now there's little bits that are changing, but still, until federal policy aligns itself, we won't see the change. But again, getting back to the question you asked, it was just amazing and continues to be, because now we're about to hit another major cusp. Whether it happens this year or next year, we're going to see the or rescheduling of cannabis off of Schedule 1. And what that is going to do for operators, investors, for the industry, I don't think anyone quite realizes that the boom we saw over the last decade is going to look like a bump compared to the mountain that we're going to see once federal policy in the United States finally finds some alignment with state policy and the will of the voters.
So, because some people are pushing back a little bit on rescheduling, and there are a lot of skeptics in the industry about whether or not it'll actually make a big impact. Why do you foresee such a shift?
Okay, so it's all about money. People like to say that it was the business people that sold the picks and shovels during the gold rush that made all the money. They made a lot of money. It was the bankers that made all the money. It was the capital sources that really ended up being enormously profitable. And that can't happen in this industry now. But once we see descheduling, this is the cascade that I believe is going to create the opportunities and the groundswell that we see coming. And that is, to sort of highlight it, right now, if I have a portfolio with any one of the big financial institutions, and I have real estate that I own, and they carry my paper, they carry my financings on it. If I were to rent that to somebody that is in the THC business in any capacity, they are likely to let me know they're going to have to close my account unless I terminate that arrangement, because they can't be in a position their charter does not allow them to finance criminal activity. And so technically speaking, anything that has anything to do with THC is criminal activity to these large institutions. So as a result, the people who want to get the real estate need to find family offices, individual investors, and real very obscure and arcane alternative sources of capital. Once this goes off of Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, and banks now can say, oh, this is no longer a Schedule 1. It's not a crime. There is a path that allows this to exist. They're going to be able to start providing financing. But even more importantly, in my opinion, the capital markets, New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, American Stock Exchange, they can't touch anything that touches THC, because the FINRA is saying, well, until this is not a Schedule 1 crime, we're going to preclude any business that touches THC from trading on any of the national exchanges. But once that is possible, you're going to see so many companies looking to to get access to capital through those exchanges. And more importantly, all of that institutional money that can't invest anywhere in this industry and doesn't want to take the chance. And they don't even invest in hemp really, because if the hemp tests hot above 0.3%, it's now Schedule 1 again. So even though the USDA has a policy path for people to be in the hemp industry, it is being prevented by its being right up against its proximity to the cannabis industry and the issues that still exist with that. So to sort of sum up, access to capital through financial institutions, mortgage lending, equipment lease financing, et cetera, that are critical to allow for access to capital and velocity of capital for businesses to grow and to finance their growth. And then as well as access to the public markets will also create access to capital, unlike in orders of magnitude greater than anything we have seen previously.
So if the people with the picks and shovels made money, but the bankers made most of the money, why do you find yourself working more on the operational side of hemp and cannabis than on the finance side of it?
Oh, great question. So I really am involved in both. And we are, as a lot of the podcasts that have recently been published by Decentralife, public company WDLF, and the CEO there, Ken Tapp, and I have been working on something together that we have started to talk about, which is looking at how tokenomics are going to change and tokenization are going to change the capital markets and access to capital. So I not only am continuing to look at finance, I am looking at, as the great one Wayne Gretzky said, you don't play to where the puck is or where it's been, you play to where it's going. And so with these recent shifts that we have been tracking, where BlackRock, where Fink came out at BlackRock, or years ago, he said blockchain was a nothing burger and Bitcoin is a scam. BlackRock is now the largest institutional holder of Bitcoin in the world. And he just recently said that the future of the capital markets lies entirely with tokenization. And I have been saying that going back a decade. And so we are not quite a decade. It's probably closer to 8 years. You can see interviews of me regarding this from 7 years ago. And so I am continuing to look at that. And then also, let me say, at the same time, there are opportunities that we see in the hemp and cannabis industry right now. In hemp, because we want to avoid anything that touches THC, we see opportunities that are so compelling that we absolutely are going to pursue those as well. And that is the hemp cigarette industry we see as a tremendous harm reduction industry and an incredible opportunity moving forward. And then we also are looking at a couple of other areas that we haven't spoken about yet, and I can't really talk about yet, but where, you can look at a product that maybe costs 3, 4, 5 cents to produce, that has retail prices of $3 to $10 per unit. And it is a market that is going to have 7 to 10 years of growth without a doubt over the next decade. And it is currently has no established players on a national basis in terms of brand or or presence. And so we see such incredible opportunity in those blue ocean markets that those will be it's beyond it is beyond anything I've seen in any industry before. And so we're looking at those. At the same time, we still do have our hand in understanding the financial aspect of the market and how we can provide value and participate in that as well.
What is tokenomics?
Tokenomics, okay. It's a great question. I mean, it's a big question. So let me just pull up some notes here. Okay. I'm a student of the capital markets, and I'm also a student of the history of money, banking, and the creation of the definition of and the trading of value. And so tokenomics are an evolution of our monetary system. So when you think about the first coin ever minted in the country of Lydia thousands of years ago, and that this was an innovation, this idea of creating a coin that was now an established marker of value, where we all in that region, everybody had this agreement. Well, this, for all intents and purposes, a coin is a token. And so the sovereign of the country understood that if it established a monetary unit, that it would create efficiencies that allow for the addressing of scarcity in a more efficient way. That's what money is really about. How we address scarcity to reduce scarcity in our society. And monetary systems evolved going back from those first coins ever minted. I actually have one of them here that was a gift. From those first coins ever minted, which, by the way, were minted in an ore called electrum, which is a naturally found occurring combination of silver and gold. It's known as green gold because of the way it gets a patina, which is why my company's name was Electrum Partners, that we founded in 2014, reference to green gold and without referencing cannabis directly. So now, tokenomics. As we've seen monetary systems evolve and then eventually lead to the greatest innovation that we ever saw in capitalism, which was the Dutch East India Trade Company establishing that this little country, Holland, this little country that was competing with countries with much larger economies like Great Britain, France, Italy, Spain, and more. And yet, why was the Dutch Navy the most successful for a very long period of time? The reason was there was a company, one of the first actual companies created, that saw, well, when we send our boats from Amsterdam to the New World to go collect beaver pelts and spices and gold, we're going to stock the hold of our ship with all of the goods that we're going to then bring back to Europe and sell. Well, they allowed people to share in the stock, to purchase a share of the stock in the boat. That was a first. It was the first crowdfunding event ever. And it changed the world because all of a sudden they were able to democratize and access a much larger pool of capital than any of the competing nations and fund the Navy with more money because they were getting money from a much larger group pool that they were able to get access to. Well, they brought that technology to the New World. That ended up becoming they created New Amsterdam, which eventually became New York. But New Amsterdam had a wall at the edge of the colony, and along that wall was a street, and on that street there was a tree that was a buttonwood tree. And you were told, if you were looking to get capital back at that time, go talk to the people who were drinking tea under the buttonwood tree, and they would help you get access to capital through potentially selling shares of stock in a company they'd help you start. Well, that became the foundation of the Buttonwood Agreement, which was the foundation document of the New York Stock Exchange. And that ended up changing the world. This idea of selling shares of stock to create access to capital for entrepreneurs, it tore through the entire world and created the economies that we see around us today. But again, the trading of shares of stock, for all intents and purposes, again, each share of stock is sort of a token. It's a physical object that has value associated with it that is agreed upon amongst everybody who is participating in this, that each share has a certain amount of value, etc. Well, as we've seen technology evolve, and we've seen the gold standard come and go, we now realize that we are working in a world where there are this digitization of ledgers that were previously handwritten. They're now being kept digitally. Well, those are centralized ledgers. Citibank has its ledger and Chase has its ledger. But some people got there were some brilliant people who figured out at the end of the first decade of the 21st century that if you could create a distributed ledger that was not centralized, and this ledger was cryptographically protected and transparent at the same time, you could create something that would inherently, as a system, create a higher level of trust than you would even get from a sovereign of a country issuing its own currency, because countries come and go. But as long as the internet continues to exist and you have these distributed ledgers that have these tokens, they call them cryptocurrencies, but they're really digital tokens. As we move forward, those are going to end up becoming the standard of how we exchange and hold value and move value around. Well, those tokens are so much more efficient than the systems we use today. For example, if Rip Van Winkle fell asleep in the operations back office of a brokerage firm after the crash, just in 33, let's say, after the establishment of the Act in 33, or even a little bit before that, slept for 90 years, and he woke up in 2024 in that same back office, there would be incredible things. There'd be phones and screens, but the system of physically printing certificates and having the depository transfer corporation, move the certificates, and then when the trade goes by, you have to move certificates around. He'd recognize all that, because for all intents and purposes, it hasn't changed for the last 100 years or longer. And now it is about to, because when you start saying, well, why shouldn't stock certificates be non-fungible tokens, images attached to the token that is on the blockchain, that is, again, decentralized, because there's so many servers around the world and so many machines that are carrying all the information in a way to create almost infinite redundancy. So the tokens and tokenomics is the understanding of how these database-based distributed ledgers that are being populated on a technology known as blockchain or hash graph, how those are going to change the way the markets work, how trades happen, how value is moved around, and it's going to remove so much inefficiency and remove so much friction and make it faster, more efficient, safer. And at the same time, we're also going to see a change in how we look at the individual people and their access to their own capital, their own value, that they've collected money, where banks won't be as necessary anymore. They won't provide the use. The whole reason that banks existed was you had to have somewhere to put your gold, because you didn't want to keep it in your own office or your own house. So the banks were the safe place. But that's not needed anymore. They've become a tax on the system rather than efficiency in the system. And so tokenomics is understanding how these particular technologies are going to implement and how they're going to allow for the development and the advancement in a more efficient fashion of monetary systems and financial markets around the world. That's the best I can do right now.
No, that's I think that was an incredible summation, and hopefully shed a little bit more light on crypto in general for a lot of people that just understand it as a vague concept that's thrown around between the media and friends that are dabbling. But one thing I'm curious about is you kind of talked about the potential for both a hemp and the cannabis market. Which one do you feel has the greatest long-term potential?
So that's actually a question that no one has given me, and it's a really great question. I'm going to tell you why, and then I'll answer it. So the question is amazing because as we look at the change that the abandonment of prohibition represents, and the allowing of these industries to function like other industries, we're seeing two things. So cannabis as a personal choice, whether it's for relaxation, enjoyment, and celebration, or for therapeutic reasons, helps with pain, helps with sleep, helps with anxiety, helps with PTSD, helps with so many issues. Whether it's because of that or because you just want to get together with some friends and smoke some pot and have dinner together and go for a swim in your pool, whatever choice it is, it represents a market of consumer use in certain areas. Now, the consumer use in the way that beer is consumed is an enormous market. I think actually in the United States, cannabis surpassed beer sales not that long ago. When you look at cannabis as a nutraceutical and supplement, and the plant, so whether it's CBD, CBG, CBN, CBDV, or any one of the minor cannabinoids that are currently being researched, of which there are hundreds, and how those can have real world function in the human body to provide relief and to help a human being have greater homeostasis of wellness. That's a big market as well. So call it nutraceuticals. Then there are pharmaceuticals that are going to be based upon the plant, and that's going to be digging deeper and going into actual FDA trials on the compounds that are identified from the plant, and as well, multiple compounds, and that's another very large market. You're talking hundreds of billions worldwide, if not $500 billion, to look at these different industries combined, maybe even approaching $750 billion when you look at pharmaceuticals over the next 10 years, 20 years. You look at nutraceuticals and supplements, and then you look at what you call recreational or personal use. So that's a very big market. But what I learned, and many people I realized they avoid seeing, is that when you look at the global plastics market, paper market, and fiber markets, you're talking about many trillions. And when you look at something in particular, plastics, and what an absolute catastrophe it is environmentally, and from a public health perspective, again, every placenta from every birth in the United States it's expected to have microplastics present in it. That means every one of us has them in our body. Why? Because hydrocarbon-based plastics, fossil fuel-based plastics, have an extremely long half-life. They exist for a very long time and they don't break down. And when they do break down, they break down with trace amounts of toluene and benzene and these other horrific chemicals that are endocrine disruptors and carcinogens and poisons. Well, there's a rumor on the internet that Henry Ford built a car out of hemp. As far as I can understand, that is incorrect. That's sort of a miss. What did happen is he did build a car that used plant-based plastics, of which hemp was likely the key ingredient. And he said in the 40s that those plastics were superior to steel for much of the needed components of an automobile. And so he even identified that plant-based plastic, hemp-based plastic, was a future market. But again, you couldn't get access to it except in the 40s for a limited period of time during the war, because hemp was allowed to be grown because it was used for parachutes and ropes and things like that. And so, little known fact, the word canvas, as I understand it, is referencing cannabis. Cannabis is not an accident that originally hemp was the use for that. But so to sort of circle it back around, the plastics industry and what hemp represents in being able to create plastics that will biodegrade in a much more rapid fashion. And when they biodegrade, they actually biodegrade into things that are good for the soil. So when you talk about taking the hemp-based plastic and putting it into landfill, after it's pulled carbon out of the atmosphere into the plant gets processed and turned into plastic. The plastic then gets put into landfill. You're essentially talking about sequestration of carbon in what is potentially the largest fashion that could exist on Earth, is growing fields of hemp to make plastics for single-use plastic bottles, for plastic that is in everything. Plastic is in everything, all around us. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And as we start to see plastic that is currently being, as I said, hydrocarbon-based, be replaced with hemp-based plastics, the size of that market is in the trillions. And I imagine that we will see hemp take a significant bite out of it, because it not only is going to ultimately cost less, be more renewable, it's also going to be at the same time not just better for the earth, but positive. Whether you believe in anthropogenic global warming or not, we're taking some of the carbon dioxide that we put in the atmosphere out of it makes sense. And that's a path to do it. Then when you look at the global paper industry, the average US consumer, I believe, consumes, this is according to data from a few years ago, I want to say, I remember it to be over 700 pounds of paper per year. Every consumer in the United States, 700 pounds per person per year of paper. And making paper out of trees is not efficient. It's not efficient in a whole bunch of ways. They take a long time to grow, and the plants that process them are notorious for being polluters. A friend of mine lived next to a town that had a paper mill in it, and he said you could always tell the people that lived near the paper mill because they smelled bad. And that was because the odor got into their body from the pollutants in the area. And hemp grows faster and ultimately will cost more and produce better paper than you can get from wood. And again, you don't have to go far to figure out that growing trees to try to make paper out of pulp versus a plant that grows like a weed is probably not going to, it's easy to see that $100 billion industry, trillion dollar industry, multiple $900 billion industry is heading towards hemp to stay likely disrupting that. And then fiber, cotton. The hemp fiber is stronger. It's if I remember correctly, it's antiviral and antibacterial and antifungal naturally. And so it's likely that we're going to see the hemp plant disrupt that industry as well. And again, you're talking about 800 billion or so. And so although the cannabis industry for personal use and consumer use is a gigantic market, these are some of the biggest markets of any sort on earth, and the hemp plant is going to be very disruptive to them.
So how is Indoor Harvest redefining our understanding of hemp?
So we're actually, at this time, I wanted to go with things that I saw as low-hanging fruit. Businesses that would be easy to get up and running. I mean, simple, if not easy. So the hemp cigarette industry, we know how to make cigarettes are a known product. You grow a plant, you harvest the plant, you process the plant, you wrap it in paper and package it and get it out to market, and people love it. And that's not it's the tobacco has been terrible. Hemp is not terrible. It has a lot of value that it brings, and we see the market size and the cost associated with it as where we want to play. And I have relationships with people in the distribution, branding, and marketing area that are dear friends and colleagues who I've been looking to work with for many years, who currently have established a relationship with us, and that we're going to be utilizing as the team moving forward. So we identified certain consumer products and certain markets that we saw as the ones that will make the most sense first. When those are up and running, we're going to start to look at the industries that we see need a substantially bigger capital investment to develop. So developing the technologies for hemp and as to be used in plastics, that's a pretty heavy lift, because you're dealing with science that is known portfolios of science, people who are known in those areas, and it requires it's going to require investment and time that we thought would be better slated in a second phase. And so looking at the industrial hemp markets is going to be a second phase of what we do. The first phase are the markets that we see as being much quicker to get up and running, and that are going to be highly profitable. And candidly, the opportunities that they represent will only exist for a short period, because once there are hemp cigarettes that are national brands and being distributed around the country in AMPMs and in Piggly Wigglies and in 7-Elevens, that opportunity won't exist anymore. So we wanted to grab it while it was there. And then we see a much larger window of opportunity as regards the technologies to develop for hemp, for plastics, paper, fiber, construction, and more.
Why the focus on sustainable hemp cultivation?
So, because I believe I've spoken about this at Guelph University and other places. I think that capitalism as a system is evolving, and we are discovering that the marriage of ethics and business are not only an ideal to pursue, they're necessary. We are facing issue. I'm a capitalist. I'm very much pro-business. And that being said, there are problems that we're facing in the United States and globally that are a result of the growing pains of capitalism as a system. And so sustainability is just a outgrowth of allowing ethics to be a determiner of the business vision and mission. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. When you say current conditions that are the result of capitalism, are you talking about like climate change?
No, I'm actually, climate change is, let's not use the the sort of the hot potato word climate change. Let's just talk about environmental issues that we're dealing with, because I want to avoid the battle, the political football. There are environmental issues. There are increased violence in violent weather. There are changes in weather systems, etc. But although that is a big part of it, I actually sort of am looking at it in a very, what I think is a very simple way, and that is, when we look at the United States, we have seen that our system, the capitalist system we live in, has diverted money from the center. So a huge amount of wealth has come from the center and the bottom and moved to the top, to a small number of people at the top. And the amount of wealth being created at the highest levels, while there is a further diversion between the mass of people and the very wealthy, that is a systemic problem. And so when I speak about the evolution of capitalism, I'm saying that our system needs to evolve so that the free market can be more effective at seeing the establishment of a very vibrant middle class that is currently being decimated and eliminated. And so that is a result, I believe, of our system of government and regulation that has shifted. And I think that we need to see our capitalist system evolve, because really our government is an emanation of our system, our economic system, and we need to see the economic system evolve with a greater sense of ethic and ethical center, and then see that flow over into government, so that government begins to operate more ethically as our capitalist and economic markets are more ethics driven.
Is there an
High
opportunity?
level and abstract, but it's something that I'm constantly wrestling with.
Is there opportunity for crypto and cannabis?
So I don't like the word crypto, and I'm going to tell
Okay.
you why. And
Okay.
then there's and just clearly, cryptocurrency. I actually like the word crypto, but I am concerned about it being a shorthand term for cryptocurrency, because I don't believe Bitcoin or Ether or Solana or any of these are actual currencies. Currency, if you look at the definition of it, has stability and transaction costs being, almost nothing. That's the whole purpose of a currency. It's efficient. When you go buy something, you don't actually, with a dollar, you don't pay a transaction cost every time, like every time Bitcoin gets traded or Ether gets traded, and even Solana, which is much more efficient. And so the term cryptocurrency, I thought, was a misnomer. I think crypto asset is the actual term, or crypto. I don't know is what the term should be, but I do know that cryptocurrency is one we need to look at, because they aren't actual currencies. There are ones that try to be closer to a currency because they're more stable and they have very low transaction costs. And I think that may end up being the case. But at this time, we haven't seen a definition of what these tokens are in terms of the buzzword that can define them and be what people use to sort of talk about them. So the default ended up becoming cryptocurrency because it just took off. In the same way that people describe MJ Freeway and other of the compliance software in the cannabis industry as seed to sale, even though nobody uses seeds anywhere in the industry, it's all clones. And so it was called seed to sale because the guy, Mark Goldfogel, who created the first, compliance software, MJ Freeway, he called it seed to sale because that's what made sense to him, because he didn't understand from a grower's perspective that seeds weren't being used. It was all clones. And so again, that's just an example of a term being used because it ends up taking off in the sort of the cultural zeitgeist of the industry. And that's what happened with cryptocurrency. Although I tried it. That's why I use the term token, because really Bitcoin is a digital token. It's a blockchain-based token. Ethereum is a blockchain-based token, and the rest of them is, XRP and Doge. These are all blockchain-based tokens, etc. And that's why I use the term token. And at some point, we may even call them secure tokens, because they may technically, according to the definition of the U.S. federal government and the SEC, what they use as the Howey test, they may actually be considered securities, but that depends upon certain things, and I don't have the four memorized. Someone else doing the work, is an investment of capital, is there an expected return? There was a fourth one, and so at some point, some of these may end up being considered securities, like stock is considered a security, or debt is. But we don't really know what the right term is at this point. I don't know, at least.
Because you're always looking to the future, are you able to enjoy your time in the present?
That's a great question. It's just how I'm wired. I've always been wired this way. I started using a PC in 1980, pretty early. I was online in 1983 doing stuff like hours a day. I went to Burning Man for the first time in 1998. I was involved in the internet new media in 1996 and 97 and 98. Again, very early. I ended up getting involved in looking at before there was cryptocurrency. As a matter of fact, the way I found cryptocurrency, I was looking at digital currencies for some very, sort of silly reason. And I went to go to as I said, I went to San Francisco to the Singularity Institute for Artificial Intelligence Summit, and my friends were going to a dispensary, and one of them said, "Oh, Leslie," knowing that I was interested in cybersecurity and information security, said, "Leslie, have you been to the Silk Road yet?" I said, "What's the Silk Road?" He said, "The Silk Road, it's an auction marketplace. It's an online marketplace where people are selling all sorts of illegal things." And they said, just go into how to go into the Tor network, which I did. And they said, just go, download Onion and go to the Tor network and look for the Silk Road. And I went and saw it in 2010, and my mind was blown. And I saw that people were selling marijuana and all sorts of other things online, but the only way you could pay for it was with this thing called Bitcoin. And I saw that, and I'd been studying digital currencies and virtual currencies, going back to 2004. And I was like, this is mind blowing. This is going to be, and I can't, and it's embarrassing because I didn't buy any, even though I knew it was a massive shift. And they were 10 cents. It was 10 cents a coin. And I called up my friend David, who was meeting with somebody at the time. And I told him, this is it. I saw it. This is the future. This is the future. And yeah. So again, I'm wired to look at these things. And then I got involved in the cannabis industry early. And then I just tend to find things and see things before they happen because I'm wired a certain way. It's not like I tried to figure it out. I gravitate to these things.
Well, I typically, towards the end of these conversations, I like to ask about predictions regarding the industry and the market. But because you have such a global perspective, what are your predictions for, the nation, our culture, and the world as a whole going forward? Are you optimistic?
Wow. Okay. This is where I spend a lot of my time, is those questions. And I am hopeful. I would say I'm cautiously optimistic and concerned. So, a couple of things. There's a great book that I read in 2001 called The New Renaissance by Doug Robertson. And it talked about information revolutions, language, the first information revolution, written word, the second information revolution, printing press, third information revolution, and then digital information technology, the fourth one. And each information revolution led to a renaissance, hence the title of the book, The New Renaissance. And in that book, what he said something that I thought was fascinating. He said that the killer app of the next generation is going to be, how do we separate the signal from the noise? Because in the same way Matt McLuhan predicted the media is the message, and that we would be surrounded, that what he was saying was media would become so omnipresent that the message we're getting was actually, the media itself became its own sort of material. And that's where we are. And so, yes, am I concerned? I am. What are some of the things I'm concerned with? We've been at war with Russia for a long period of time. They have been using a organized mechanism to attack the United States through disinformation campaigns going back years. People don't pay attention to the fact that Prigozhin, who just got killed, who died in that airplane crash, who was the Wagner group, when you look at his history, they say he was in the restaurant business and he ran troll farms. People go by that because they don't understand what's a troll farm. A troll farm is thousands of people in Russia who are paid every day to use the technologies that we've developed against us. And to go and to make the United States weaker by making us distrust each other, distrust our institutions, and come up into and exist as though we're almost in this post-truth era. And it has been, in my opinion, essentially an act of war. That's an active attack on the United States on an ongoing basis, and it's been going back years. And so that's one of the things that concerns me, because until we're able to navigate our own systems to be able to see what's real and what's not, we're constantly being bombarded by information that is questionable in terms of its veracity. Second, the social media and technologies that have evolved, unfortunately, some of the emergent behavior that has evolved out of them is it's figured out that suffering equals profits. So we have these systems of media that are getting us excited and anxious and angry, because the algorithm has figured out that when we're excited, anxious, and angry, we are more engaged with the platform, which generates more revenue. So essentially, making us sick is making money, and nobody has sort of put that together, that's actually what's going on, and it is. Next, our educational system, because of this division in wealth and the sort of diversion of so much wealth to the top, and then the bottom having less and less, you now have it where it's normal for both the mother and the father of a family needing to work. The problem with that is there's no one there with the children during the day. So they have to go to school. Well, they're not going to school to get educations. They're going to school because school has become the daycare. So the parents can work to serve the economy. And we need to shift that. Our educational system needs to start focusing on how to teach critical thinking and decision making. And it hasn't been doing that. It's become this unfortunately, it's become to a great extent a daycare where children are able to go so the parents can work to keep the economy going. And so these are all issues that I see. I believe that they will right themselves over time and will evolve past this. I think that the United States as a country and as a system of government has a much greater degree of elasticity in it than most people give it credit for. And I think it's more brittle than it is, although it does have points where it could and would break. So the answer to your question is, again, yes, I am hopeful. I am cautiously optimistic, and it's only going to change if people start to get more active in understanding that in some fashion every day they need to do what they can to help make the United States a better place, and less time with the thinking about getting engaged with social media, and more time of actually doing things to make a difference, and realizing that responsibility that exists as a citizen of the United States is something that means you're going to be working to do that for the rest of your life. And we need to start getting that level of responsibility in everyone and how they go about their day, so that we can start to have a country where everyone has a certain sense of participation, ownership, and franchise that they have has been challenging. So again, a lot of sort of abstract ideas that, given that I'm working on refining into some things, and I'm going to be starting a TikTok channel soon where I'm going to speak about these things in short sort of 1 minute blips and 2 minute blips, and that's going to start any day now. And the first thing I'm going to talk about probably is monetary systems, cryptocurrency, tokenomics, and things like that. So I am optimistic, although I think we definitely are in a very dangerous time.
Well, I look forward to following you on TikTok and getting a little bit more of your insight on a day-to-day basis. Leslie, I really do appreciate the insight. It's been very informative and far-reaching.
Thank you for giving me free reign to speak about things that I'm passionate about.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, sometimes I think it's good for everyone to kind of reach outside of just the cannabis and hemp industry and talk about the issues surrounding us as a whole. But, before we get out of here, is there anything else that you want to add about yourself, your company, or anything in particular you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience knows about yourself?
Oh, wow. Great question. There isn't anything I came into this with. I mean, if there's a message that I'd like to get out there, it is that the last thing we talked about, and that is, so we need to be engaged, and I think engagement needs to be civil, and engagement needs to be a willingness to speak to people who have a difference of opinion, and also, we need to create an establishment of critical thought, meaning if I discover, and this happens, that I had something to learn in a conversation with someone, that they had an opinion, or they were talking about something, and what they were putting forth was different from what I was putting forth, and then I ended up learning from them. We need to have that possibility. We need to be open to learning from our friends and neighbors and colleagues that don't agree with us. And we need to be able to apply an accepted system of critical thought to that. So if I end up discovering that I was mistaken about a particular idea or policy or something, and I'm learning, and I'm now adopting the opinion of the person that I was speaking with, or the position that they're putting forth, I need to be able to do that without becoming dogmatic and saying, well, I see why what you're saying is, but I just think that, again, it's like this idea of alternative facts or different set of facts. There's facts are facts, truth is truth, reality is reality, and we need to be able to come to, I'm sorry about this. We need to be able to come to we need to have an accepted sort of baseline that we can all agree to, so that we can always allow ourselves to grow and learn, because you're not going to learn if, when faced with having data that's new to you that you were unaware of before, and you're now going to add it to your own opinion and your own library of information. If you choose to say, well, I'm not going to accept it, I'm going to continue to believe what I came into believing just because I can believe it and I can deny facts. That's not, we can't live that way. That won't work. We need to get better at it. So I want people to be, I want to ask that people are open-minded. Don't treat your neighbors and your colleagues and your friends who differ with you with contempt. Always be willing to have conversation. Break bed, talk about the things that you have difference of opinions, ask questions, listen to what people say, and be open-minded, and allow yourself to evolve in terms of your opinions. And we need to be more like that. And I'd like to say that's my message.
A call for humility and civility. It's incredible how important it is right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Well, Leslie, thank you again for your time. I hope we have a chance to do it again soon.
Thank you so much. I would anytime. And if I can help you with anything, just reach out and ask. If I can introduce you to anyone that's in my network, I'll absolutely do it. I think I found you on LinkedIn. I'm going to connect with you on LinkedIn. And if there's anything I can help with at any time, just ask. I'm always happy to be of service.
Well, thank you again. Before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For Leslie Bocskor, CEO and chairman of Indoor Harvest, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. We'll see you next week.